In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the parking brake shoes on this Jeep Liberty. These are located inside your brake rotor, so the brakes do have to come off for this. Let's install these TRQ shoes. Let's remove this wheel, 19mm socket for all 5 of your lug nuts, remove them, and then take the wheel off. A little tip on these vehicles, it is common for these lug nuts to swell so your socket won't quite fit on. You're going to have to tap it on, seat it on the lug nut, take the lug nut off, and then get the lug nut out of the socket by tapping it out through this hole with a punch. Remove the wheel. With an 18mm socket, let's break free the caliper bolts that hold the caliper onto the rear axle. Be careful of your ABS wire as you swing your ratchet down. You don't want to accidentally pinch it or break it off. Do the same to this one over here. These are somewhat tight, so make sure you have decent leverage when you do this. Now you can remove them all the way. With the first bolt removed, take out the second one. There we go. Now you should be able to pull the caliper away. I have a bungee cord here that I'm going to hang the caliper with. That way it doesn't pull on the brake hose. You don't want to stretch that, it will damage it. Next we have to remove the rotor, and unfortunately for me it is extremely rusted on here. And if you're reusing your rotor, you definitely don't want to hammer on the front or the back side of the braking surface of this rotor. So the best way is to go in between the lug studs. Of course, don't hit the lug studs because that would damage the threads. Because mine is in such bad shape here, I'm going to start with an air hammer and try to vibrate this rust loose. Hopefully it breaks free. If not, we'll take the big hammer and start hitting it. The shocks should eventually break it free. There we go, that's broken free now. So this is where hopefully you're at, and you can wiggle it back and forth and remove it. The only thing holding it on is going to be the parking brake shoes, which if we have to adjust, well, I was going to say we can adjust, but typically it should come right off. Next, what I like to do is spray down this area with some brake parts cleaner so that I can get rid of all the dust. That way when I take the shoes apart, all the dust doesn't go airborne and breathe it in. So grab some brake parts cleaner and a collection bucket underneath to collect all of the drippage and spray it all off. I'm going to spray the hub while I'm at it. I will be cleaning it later, not yet though, so I'm just going to clean it off for now. Depending on which side you're working on, this might be on the front or towards the front of the vehicle or towards the back. Let's focus on the adjuster area here. I'm going to try to de-adjust this adjuster. Might not be possible with the amount of rust, but actually it looks like it is working. A lot of times these do seize up and you want to make sure you unseize them if that's the case. Unthreading this all the way is going to actually compress the shoes and will remove some tension off of this little spring here, which is actually going to be the next step. As you can see, there's space over here, which means the shoes need to be pressed in a little bit. The more you compress this, the more slack you're giving yourself. Okay, so at this point, this spring should have minimal pressure on it, which means it might be able to just get popped off like this. I'm going to grab a pick. To take this off, I'm just going to get my pick behind it. This is going to help me hook onto it and pry it off. There it is. I'm personally not reusing any of this hardware. I have a whole new hardware kit. This is in pretty poor condition, as you can see, but if yours is in good condition and it's just dirty, clean it up and reuse it. Now I'm going to push this shoe up a little bit. Looks like the adjuster is seized in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the shoe up and with another pry bar tap this down. It's probably going to be seized on the bottom as well, so we'll have to pry it out of here. There we go. If you are reusing your hardware, you are also going to be reusing the adjuster. Mine is in actually decent condition other than it being stuck here and here, but that's no big deal. What matters is the threads. They move freely without me even having to unseize them. So if you were reusing this, you'd want to clean up these areas and lubricate it, which I will show you later. I will, however, be installing a brand new one, so just keep that in mind. On the other side of the shoes, we have these two springs. It might look like one, but there's actually one like this on the back side. To unhook this one, I'm just going to grab a pry bar and pry it up and over until it comes off of its mounting location. There we go. That rear one is unhooked. For the front one, it's going to be a little trickier just because I can't get onto the hook like I did on the other one. You can try a pick, or you could do what I'm doing and grab some needle nose locking pliers or regular locking pliers if that's what you have that fits. Clamp them on tight onto the spring, especially since I'm replacing my spring. I don't mind it if it gets damaged a little bit. Use the hub as a leverage point. Okay, there we go. So basically just pull up and twist out, and that should release your outer spring. Not too worried about them being stuck on the lower shoe. I'll get those out in a minute. For now, let's free up the top shoe, and all that entails is punching out these little spring clips that lock them in. There's your top shoe. Once again, if you are reusing your hardware, such as the pins, springs, and anything else, inspect them. These actually are in reusable condition, but of course I do have new ones like I said. Same setup on the bottom here. There's the bottom shoe with the two springs still attached. Now it's time to do a little bit of cleaning. We have to clean the areas where the parking brake shoes ride and the adjuster here. Mine is not seized very often though. These do seize, especially if you don't use your parking brake often. And what you want to do is remove it, and I'll show you exactly how, and free it up. Otherwise, not only could you have parking brake shoes that stick to the rotor and then your brakes start dragging, that's not good. Or if you need to engage your parking brake, it might engage and then get stuck engaged, then you're stuck. Basically, I'll show you how to free it up and get it nice and lubricated so it can last properly. These little raised areas, you don't have to sand down or anything, just wire brush them a little bit. And obviously the backing plate is not in ideal condition, but it is still nice, thick, and reusable. If your backing plate is rotted, you're gonna have to replace it. Otherwise, the parking brake shoes cannot be held on properly. And that would cause other issues. With that cleaned, I'm also going to touch up right here where the shoes sit, just so I can avoid any squeaking and grinding noises from the shoes once they're on. Doesn't have to look perfect. Now I want to address the lever here. If yours is completely seized, you're going to have to take it off of the back side, or you're going to have to tap it up like this to extend it. Once you extend it, you'll see that right in here, it has a pivot point. If yours is good, it'll just fall out like this. If not, you'll notice that it's actually hooked on to that little pin right there. So what it does is it basically pivots up and down on it. I'm able to just remove mine and lubricate it. Of course, I'm going to clean it first. It does have an arrow. If you're on the driver's side, the arrow will be pointing up like this. It'll be upside down. If you're on the passenger side, which is where I am right now, this arrow will be pointing down. You can reference this arrow right here. The two have to match, and this is basically just your main pivot point of the brake shoes, so that's what you want to go by. I sprayed mine down with a little bit of brake parts cleaner. If yours was seized up, you're going to want to put it in a vise, tap it with a hammer to get this lever moving here, and then lubricate it. If it's in really poor condition, you're going to have to source a new one. At this point, mine is cleaned up and it was pretty much already ready to go other than needing some lubrication. So use some sort of high temperature grease, whether it's brake grease or a high temp anti-seize. I'm going to use the anti-seize, stick it right in here on the pivot point, and get it lubricated. Not too much though, because you don't want it to start running down onto the backing shield here and onto the rotor. Once you get some lubrication in there, work it back and forth to make sure that it's going to work the grease in there and function as it should. This is perfect, so it's ready to go. Like I said, you do not need a lot. This is all I'm going to put on there. Get this pivot point up and out. You can basically pull on the cable. That'll push it out and drop the pivot lever down onto it. You can grease that up as well, and then when you push it down, it should all slide into place just like that. Obviously it's not going to stay perfectly in place because it is lubricated, but there we go. We are ready to install the shoes. Right before we install the shoes, I recommend applying some brake grease or silicone paste or high temperature grease that you have to the areas that we just cleaned up, the little raised areas. This is going to prevent the shoes from squeaking as they operate back and forth. Do this to all four. The other area I prefer greasing is on this lever that we just cleaned up, just a little bit, as well as right here where the shoes ride. For the same reason, I don't want to hear any squeaking when I apply or disengage the parking brake. So to get these shoes back on here, what I'm going to do, and I found this to be the best way for this vehicle because of the setup that it has, is first of all, both shoes are the same. It doesn't matter which one goes on top and which one goes on the bottom. I'm going to hook the inner spring onto the one that is going to go up top, and also connect it onto the one that's going on the bottom, basically locking both of them together with just one of the larger springs. Having said that, I'm going to bring the shoes with the spring in here and try to set them into position. It's going to be a little challenging because obviously we have spring pressure on this, but this is going to be the best way, if not the only way, to get these locked into position here. It's okay if you pull on the spring hard and twist it a little bit. Obviously you don't want to completely bend it and make it take a completely different shape, but it does have some strength to it. Watch your fingers for pinch points. There we go. Make sure the pivot right here, parking brake pivot, is locked into both of them, and that both shoes are locked into their main pivot point, which they are, so that's good. Next, I'm going to lock these both into the backing shield, backing plate. That way they stop moving around like this. That's going to allow me to get the other spring in without them being all floppy. Stick your pin through the backing shield. Line the pad up, or the shoe I should say, and then the spring clip that locks it in will have a round circle cutout and then one that needs to follow the shape of the end of the pin. Best way I found to do this is with a little pry bar or screwdriver that you can push right on this slot with, and then have your finger on the back of the pin ready to turn it into position as you press the spring in. There we go. Just like that. This one's locked in. Tap it down in place. Let's do the same to the bottom one. Same deal at the bottom. Slide the pin through. Have your locking clip ready. And your pry bar. And then lock them in. Okay, there we go. Might take a few tries, but once you get it locked in, it should be good to go. Now let's take care of the outer large spring. I'm going to hook it into the top. And once it's hooked onto the top, slide it in down here. To get this lower spring on, I'm going to use some locking pliers. Lock them on really tight on this spring. This will give me basically an area to pull down on and then push it down into its corresponding hole at the bottom. Make sure you lock these on nice and tight so that it doesn't go flying. Use the hub as a leverage point. Once it's partially hooked in, You can unlock your locking pliers. Be very careful because it's basically just sitting on the edge here. Take a pry bar or whatever you have that'll push it in and give it a tap. There it is. That's locked in. Double check it to make sure that it's actually sitting straight and it's not hooked on anything that it's not supposed to. Both springs are parallel, locked in, shoes are locked in, so let's go on the other side, put the adjuster in. On the threads of this adjuster, I'm going to add some silicone paste. You can use brake grease if that's what you have. Just lubricate them so that they have, well, some sort of long-lasting lubrication on here. In order to work the grease in, I'm going to take the little star wheel and thread it on all the way. That's going to get grease worked into all the threads. I'm going to bring it all the way up. It's going to have to go there anyway. That would be the most compressed setting of the adjuster for the shoes. And we're starting out with fresh shoes, so that's what you would want to do. If you want to add a little bit of extra grease on here, go ahead. Put it together with the base of it. And then it's going to have to go right in between the shoes here for the spring. Spread these apart. There we go. Let's grab the smaller spring here. This one's a little bit weaker, so I'm able to just grab it with a pick and lock it into its mounting hole over here. Perfect. That's locked in. So at this point, let's get a rotor on and set tension on the parking brake shoes, or set the adjustment basically. I do have to clean the hub surface. I can't leave it dirty and rusted like this, but before I do that, I want to get the rotor on here. That way we can adjust the parking brake shoes and be done with that. I'm installing a new rotor, but that doesn't really matter for the application that we're in here, whether it's your old rotor or a new one. At this point, you want to either lean on it and push it, or have a couple lug nuts holding it on tight. Spin it. You can hear the parking brake shoes touching a little bit. What I want to do now is clamp it on nice and tight with these lug nuts and basically hold it on. I'm going to engage the parking brake, disengage it a couple times in a row. That'll seat the shoes and make sure that they're sitting nice and even. And after that, we can adjust. What you want to hear with parking brake shoes like these is you want to hear them just barely touch. You don't want them to have a lot of drag on them. Otherwise, they could overheat, could cause binding and other issues. But if they just barely touch, they'll be close enough to where when you pull on the parking brake lever, they'll lock up the wheel just like they should. To better hold this on, I put an axle nut in so it can get clamped down nice and tight. I'm gonna snug it up. And now what I'm going to do is go on the back side. You can go in the vehicle if you want, engage that parking brake lever. I'm just gonna pull on the cable. That's gonna do the same thing. I have a pry bar prying on the parking brake lever back here. I'm gonna spin the wheel and lock it up with the parking brakes. Okay, this should seat the shoes nicely. I can hear that they're touching continuously. Personally, I would say that's good. You can feel out the parking brake lever from inside and make sure that it is not going all the way up or stopping after just one or two clicks. That would be way too tight, or too loose if it's going all the way up. I'm happy with this adjustment, so let's take the rotor off, clean up the hub so that this rotor has a perfectly flat surface to mount on. Okay, pull that rotor back off. My hub is in, well, not horrible condition, but it's not great either. I'm going to use a wire brush and try to brush all the rust off. Basically, you want a nice flat surface for that rotor to mount on. Once we're done, we're obviously going to coat it in some anti-seize so that it cannot corrode any further. And we did have quite a bit of corrosion built up on the rotor here. Also, if you're reusing your old rotor, you want to do the same thing on the back side of it so that it's nice and flat. Apply a thin layer of anti-seize to the hub, just like I said earlier, that way it doesn't corrode in the future. Also, this helps the rotor not stick on here. Put some on the inner surface here, on the center bore of the hub, and of course a thin layer all across the rest of it. With this nicely cleaned up and anti-seized, put the rotor back. Now take your caliper and put it over the rotor. Have a bolt ready to start it on to its threads. That way you can let go of the caliper and it won't fall off. There it is. Once you get one started, you can let go. Start in the second one. I'm going to bottom these out, and the torque for these is 75 foot-pounds. And 2. Let's get the wheel back on. Put back on all 5 of your lug nuts. Bottom them out in a cross pattern so the wheel can seat evenly, and also in a cross pattern, tighten them to 100 foot-pounds. Once again, 100 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them if you want. There you have it, job is done.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.